My former business partner smirked at the investor gala and said, "Tell everyone the name of your first startup." Believing she'd humiliate me in front of our new backers, I said Daedalus, but the firm's 68-year-old silent partner froze, set down his scotch, and ordered her to apologize before anyone even understood why. "Tell everyone the name of your first startup." Renata's smile was vicious. It was the kind of expression she usually reserved for vendor negotiations, bright and polished, but utterly devoid of warmth. The whole VIP table was watching. We were seated in the private dining room of a restaurant that didn't print prices on the menu, surrounded by dark mahogany paneling and the low, expensive hum of wealth. Renata had orchestrated this exact moment. "Come on," she said, raising her voice just enough to cut through the ambient jazz. "Don't make it awkward." That was her signature move. Shove someone off a cliff, then criticize their landing. I looked at her in her tailored ivory blazer, her champagne flute raised in a mock toast. 12 high-net-worth individuals were sitting around the table, waiting for me to become her punchline. They were the people holding the pen over our $3 million seed round. I set my cloth napkin on the table. I didn't break eye contact. I said one word. "Daedalus." Renata burst out laughing. It was a practiced, musical sound. Daedalus? Honestly, that sounds like a rejected sci-fi movie, or a failed high school robotics team. A few people at the table chuckled with her. It was a reflex. She was the charismatic face of our new venture, the closer, the one who painted the vision while I built the actual architecture in the background. I sat completely still, my hands folded in my lap, my face neutral. Surviving 2 failed companies teaches you how to stop bleeding in public. What was the backup option? Renata asked, looking around the table to gather her audience. Captain Codebreaker? The Icarus Initiative? More chuckles. Beside me, our PR director Sylvie shifted uncomfortably and whispered, "Just let it slide." I turned my head slightly toward Sylvie. Why is that always my job? At the far end of the table, heavy crystal touched the tablecloth with a dull, solid thud. I looked across the private room. An older man had stopped mid-sip. He had silver hair, pale blue eyes, and broad shoulders that looked rigid under his charcoal suit. His hands were wrapped tightly around his scotch glass. This was Edmund Hartley. He was the principal investor's silent partner, 68 years old, a former aerospace engineer who rarely spoke during pitch meetings, but whose nod dictated where the money went. His face had gone completely still. It wasn't the puzzled look of an old man missing a joke. It was recognition. He pushed his chair back. The scrape of the mahogany legs against the hardwood floor cut through the polite laughter like a scalpel. When he stood up, the gravitational pull of the entire room shifted instantly to him. The chuckling died in the span of a single second. He looked directly at Renata. "Apologize." Renata blinked, her champagne flute hovering near her mouth. "Excuse me? Apologize right now." His tone didn't elevate. It didn't need to. It was the flat, quiet tone of a man who was used to absolute compliance. Renata forced a bubbly, dismissive laugh. "Edmund, come on. It was just an icebreaker. A little founder banter." "No," Edmund said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "It wasn't." The room flatlined. It was the suffocating silence of 12 millionaires simultaneously realizing they had been chuckling at a landmine. Renata searched the table for a single friendly face. She looked at our lead investor, Marcus, but he was staring at Edmund. She looked at his associates. She looked at the junior analysts who had been snickering 2 minutes ago, but they were suddenly fascinated by their silverware. "I didn't mean anything malicious by it," Renata said. The polish was starting to crack. Her voice sounded thin. Edmund's jaw tightened. That is the excuse people use when they want the destruction without the accountability. Marcus leaned forward. He bypassed Renata entirely and looked at Ingrid, Renata's executive assistant, who was sitting near the end of the table. "Did Renata plan this for tonight?" Ingrid swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around the room. "Ingrid," Marcus said quietly, "I need the truth." Ingrid glanced at Renata. Renata's eyes were screaming a threat, a promise of professional ruin if she opened her mouth, but Marcus was the money. Ingrid's hands shook as she adjusted her glasses. She admitted, her voice trembling, that Renata had explicitly added the bit about my old project to the speech notes at 4:15 p.m. "The goal," she whispered, "was to make me look administratively incompetent before the equity split was finalized tomorrow morning." The temperature at the table dropped to absolute zero. Marcus stood up. He didn't slam his hands on the table. He didn't shout. He just stood up slowly, making it perfectly clear that he was no longer funding Renata's version of reality. "I need a minute," he said. "You're leaving?" Renata whispered, her panic finally bleeding through the veneer. During our term sheet dinner, Marcus looked at her. He wasn't furious. He just looked finished. "Because I prefer not to say what I'm thinking in a public restaurant." He turned his gaze to me. "Lena, I am so sorry." He walked out. Edmund followed him, leaving his scotch half-finished on the table. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. The rest of the table emptied within 3 minutes. Whispered excuses, averted eyes, coats gathered in a rush. Soon, Renata stood alone at the head of the long, empty table, dressed immaculately, her flute still in hand. But the company no longer belonged to her. She turned to me, her chest heaving. "This is a nightmare." I picked up my glass of sparkling water, took a slow sip, and set it down exactly on the condensation ring it had left on the wood. "You knew I asked you to keep my past failures out of the press," I said. "You knew what that company cost me. But you kept pushing, because the investors were buying your act, and you couldn't stand that they were buying my tech." Nobody breathed. Sylvie and Ingrid were perfectly still, trying to blend into the wallpaper. "You laughed at the project name," I said, keeping my voice entirely level. "I remember the junior engineers who lost their life savings on it. I remember the eviction notices they got. I don't think it's funny." Renata, her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I walked out of the restaurant and took a cab back to my apartment. At 11:42 p.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. "You ruined my reputation in front of the only firm willing to back us." 3 seconds later, a second text arrived. "I hope you are thrilled." I didn't reply. I flipped the screen face down and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, we were supposed to sign the final transfer of my intellectual property over to the new corporate entity. Once I signed that paper, Renata would control 51% of the technology I had spent the last 3 years coding from scratch. At 6:15 a.m., there was a frantic, heavy knock on my apartment door. I pulled on a sweater, walked into the living room, and checked the peephole. Renata stood in the hallway, her hair pulled back harshly, her trench coat hastily tied. She looked like she hadn't slept for a single second. I undid the deadbolt and opened the door. "I'm sorry if you felt attacked," she said. No greeting, no preamble, just the rehearsed line she had probably spent 4 hours workshopping in her head. I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to let her inside. "That isn't an apology, Renata. That is damage control." Her expression hardened instantly. The faux contrition vanished. "We signed the paperwork at 9. I am aware," I said. "And if you want my signature on the patent transfer today, you will apologize in front of Marcus, Edmund, and the entire board for what you actually did." Renata bristled, her posture going rigid. "No, I am not prostrating myself in front of them because old man Hartley had a mood swing. Then I retain my intellectual property," I said. "And you have nothing to sell them." She stared at me like I had just detonated a charge she didn't realize was planted under her feet. She opened her mouth to argue, but her smartwatch buzzed aggressively. She glanced down at her wrist. The remaining color completely left her cheeks. Her face turned the color of old paper. "It's Marcus," she whispered. Her voice was hollow. "What does he say?" She didn't speak for a long moment. She just stared at the tiny digital screen, her thumb hovering over the glass. Finally, she raised her head. "He wants to meet at the office before the signing," she said. "Just you?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "He wants Edmund's legal team there too." We took an Uber to the office in complete silence. The city was just waking up, gray light filtering through the clouds, the streets slick from overnight rain. Our office space was on the 14th floor of a mid-tier commercial building. We had leased it 3 weeks ago on Marcus's dime, a sprawling open floor plan with glass-walled conference rooms that still smelled like fresh carpet and industrial adhesive. When the elevator doors parted, the floor was silent. The receptionist's desk was empty, but the lights in the main boardroom were blazing. Renata walked ahead of me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete. She pulled the glass door open. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table. Edmund sat to his right. Beside Edmund was a man I had never seen before. Late 40s, sharp jawline, wearing a slate gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. A thick manila folder rested on the table in front of him. "Sit down," Marcus said. It wasn't an invitation. Renata took a seat opposite the stranger. I sat next to her. The silence in the room was dense, physical, like the air pressure right before a thunderstorm. "This is Sullivan Thorne," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely to the man in the gray suit. "He is outside counsel for Mr. Summy, Hartley's private trust. He handles due diligence on intellectual property assets." "Marcus, we don't need to do this," Renata started, her voice slipping into its usual persuasive cadence. "Last night was unfortunate, but it was just a misunderstanding of tone. The core asset is still solid. Lena and I are ready to sign the transfer." "Quiet," Edmund said. Renata's jaw snapped shut. Edmund leaned forward, resting his forearms on the long glass table. He looked directly at me. His eyes were entirely unreadable. "Daedalus," he said. I held his gaze. "Yes, founded in 2018, Edmund continued, his voice low and steady. "Liquidated in 2021. The press release said it was a failure of market fit. The venture capital blog said you burned through $4 million in runway, trying to build a thermal regulation algorithm that couldn't scale. That's what was printed, yes," I said. Sullivan Thorne opened the manila folder. He didn't look at the papers, he just laid them flat on the table. "You didn't go bankrupt because of a market failure, Lena," Edmund said. "You went bankrupt because your lead engineer falsified the stress test data on the thermal load. If that software had gone to market and integrated with the hardware, the localized overheating would have caused electrical fires in residential units. When you found the discrepancy, you had 2 choices. Push the patch silently and risk the fires, or pull the prototype, breach your contracts, and kill the company." Renata turned to look at me, her eyes widening. She hadn't known this. Nobody knew this. The enda from the liquidation had been ironclad. "You pulled the prototype," Edmund said. "You took the blame in the industry press. And when the bankruptcy proceedings froze the corporate accounts, you drained your personal 401k to pay the severance packages for the 12 junior staff members who had nothing to do with the falsified data." I felt a sudden, sharp tightness in my chest. I kept my face blank. "How do you know that?" Edmund picked up his reading glasses from the table but didn't put them on. "Because my firm bought the scrap assets of Daedalus during the Chapter 11 auction. I audited the bankruptcy personally. I saw the wire transfers from your personal accounts to your staff. I knew exactly who you were the moment your partner said that name last night." He turned his head slowly to look at Renata. The contempt in his expression was quiet, cold, and absolute. "You," Edmund said to her, "tried to use her integrity as a punchline to impress a room full of people whose money you wanted." Renata's hands were trembling where they rested on the glass table. She tried to salvage it. She leaned forward, putting on her best mask of professional urgency. "Edmund, I swear to you I didn't have the context. If I had known, it wouldn't have mattered," Marcus interrupted. His voice was exhausted. "The fact that you didn't know is half the problem. The fact that you thought public humiliation was a viable leadership tactic is the other half." Sullivan Thorne slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Renata. It was a termination of the current term sheet. "We are pulling our funding," Marcus said. Renata stared at the paper. "You can't do that. We have an exclusivity agreement. We've leased this office. We have vendors expecting payment by Friday. The term sheet is dead," Sullivan Thorne said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of empathy. "However, my clients are prepared to offer a revised agreement." He slid a second, thicker document across the table. This one was pushed precisely between Renata and me. "We want the technology," Marcus said. "We want the new algorithm, but we are entirely restructuring the cap table. Under the new agreement, Lena assumes the role of chief executive officer, effective immediately. She retains 60% equity." Renata's head snapped up. "And me?" Sullivan tapped a silver pen against his legal pad. "You will be transitioned to a non-voting advisory role. You will surrender all board seats. Your equity will be reduced to 5%, vesting over a 4-year cliff." The room was completely silent. Outside the glass walls, I could see the sky brightening over the city skyline, the gray clouds breaking apart. Renata didn't didn't shout. She didn't cry. She stared at the paper for a long, agonizing minute. Then, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. She didn't look at Marcus, and she didn't look at Edmund. She looked only at me. It was a look of pure, distilled venom. No, Renata said. She stood up, pushing her chair back violently. You think you can ambush me in my own office? You think you can steal my company? It's not your company without her IP, Sullivan stated calmly. About that, Renata said, a terrible, desperate smile forming on her lips. I anticipated there might be friction today. So last night, at 2:00 a.m., I filed a provisional continuation on the core algorithm with the patent office. I felt the blood drain from my face. You didn't. I did, Renata said, her voice shaking but triumphant. I filed it under a separate LLC that I wholly own. I am claiming joint developmental ownership of the architecture. It's completely baseless, but it puts a legal hold on the transfer. She looked at Marcus, then at Edmund. If I am not the CEO of this company, with my original equity intact, that IP goes into litigation. It will be frozen in discovery for 5 years. By the time it clears, the tech will be obsolete, and your investment will be worthless. Sullivan Thorne didn't blink, he didn't gasp, he just uncapped his silver pen and wrote a single word on his legal pad. The scratch of the nib against the paper sounded violently loud in the quiet room. Marcus let out a long, slow breath. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair and stared at the ceiling panels. That is extortion, Marcus said, his voice flat. It's leverage, Renata corrected, smoothing the front of her trench coat. You wanted to play hardball. I'm just showing you I brought my own bat. I built this company's brand. I secured this meeting. I got us into this room. You don't get to excise me like a tumor just because Lena has a sob story and Edmund feels nostalgic. I looked at her, really looked at her. 3 years ago, we had met at a networking mixer in Soho. She had spilled white wine on my shoes and charmed me into buying her a replacement drink. I thought she was brilliant. Now, she just looked desperate. Renata, I said, you don't even know how the algorithm compiles. I know how to file a patent, she snapped. I know how to attach the GitHub repository documentation to a legal claim. I know how the US Patent and Trademark Office works. That's all that matters. Sullivan looked up from his pad. Miss Drent, he said, using her last name for the first time. Filing a bad faith provisional claim with stolen intellectual property is a federal offense. It constitutes fraud. Prove it's stolen, Renata challenged. She crossed her arms. Prove I didn't contribute to the architecture. I'm the co-founder. I have thousands of emails discussing the product roadmap. A judge will take years to untangle the IP origins. Years? Do you have years, Marcus? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew the answer. Venture capital moves on momentum. A startup locked in a 5-year IP dispute is a dead startup. No fund would touch us. Edmund finally spoke. He hadn't moved since Renata made her threat. You want 51%. I want my original deal, Renata said, her chin lifting. I remain CEO. I retain 51% equity. Lena gets 49, and your firm gets the standard board seats we agreed upon. We signed the paperwork today, and I dissolve the provisional claim tomorrow morning. She smiled. It was the same vicious, polished smile from the restaurant. It's the cost of doing business, gentlemen. Edmund looked at Marcus. Marcus looked sick. This was his fund. Edmund was the silent money, but Marcus was the one who had to answer to the limited partners if this blew up. We need the room, Marcus said. He didn't look at Renata. Both of you. Out. Renata picked up her bag. She looked entirely too pleased with herself. She walked out of the boardroom, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. I followed her, my stomach twisting into a tight, cold knot. The second the glass door shut behind us, the heavy soundproofing swallowed the boardroom's interior. We stood in the empty open plan office. The morning light was fully breaking now, casting long, pale shadows across the empty desks. You're an idiot, I said quietly. Renata turned on her heel. I'm a survivor. You should try it sometime. You're holding a grenade and pulling the pin, I said. Edmund Hartley doesn't negotiate with people who threaten him. He will crush you. He's an old man, Renata scoffed. He cares about his return on investment. Once Marcus runs the numbers, they'll see it's cheaper to keep me than to fight me. She checked her phone. Go get a coffee, Lena. We're going to be here a while. She walked toward the small kitchen area, leaving me standing by the empty reception desk. I pulled out my phone and opened the Oz admin portal app. I needed to see exactly what she had exported to attach to that provisional patent. If I could prove she exported a dead branch of the code or a corrupted file, Sullivan might have enough to file an immediate injunction and invalidate her claim today. I typed in my master credentials. Error. Access denied. I stopped. I retyped the password. Carefully. Error. Account suspended. Contact administrator. A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. I opened my email. Nothing. I opened our internal messaging app. I was logged out. I walked into the kitchen. Renata was pouring water into the coffee machine. You locked me out of the servers, I said. She didn't look up. I'm the CEO, Lena. I have executive override on all administrative privileges. I revoked your access at 3:15 a.m. You can't do that. I just did. She hit the brew button. The machine whirred to life. Until the paperwork is signed, you are technically just an employee of this LLC, and I just suspended you pending an internal review. She turned to face me, leaning against the counter. You really thought you could just walk in here, take my company, and let that old man humiliate me? I built the shell company. I hold the admin keys. I control the domains. She took a mug from the cabinet. You're a great coder, Lena, truly, but you don't know the first thing about power. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from an unknown number. Come to the stairwell. I stared at the screen. I looked at Renata, who was blissfully watching the coffee drip. I turned and walked back through the open office, heading for the heavy fire doors near the elevators. I pushed the metal door open. The concrete stairwell was cold and echoed faintly with the hum of the building's ventilation system. Standing on the landing, leaning against the railing, was Ingrid, Renata's executive assistant. She looked terrified. She was clutching a thick, scuffed leather tote bag to her chest like a shield. Ingrid, I said, what are you doing here? It's 7 a.m. She fired me, Ingrid whispered. Her voice was shaking. Last night, after Marcus and Edmund left the restaurant, she dragged me into the coat check room and told me I was terminated for gross gross insubordination. I stepped closer. Ingrid, I'm so sorry. She told me I had until midnight to clear my desk. Ingrid sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. She said if I tried to claim unemployment, she'd tell the state board I was stealing from petty cash. Bile rose in my throat. It was exactly what Renata would do. Punish the weakest person in the room for her own failure. But I didn't come here to cry about it, Ingrid said. She stood up straighter. The fear in her eyes was still there, but there was something else now too, Spite. She unzipped her tote bag. She pulled out a sleek, silver external hard drive. When she told me to clear my desk, she also told me to wipe her secondary laptop, the one she keeps at the office for travel, Ingrid said. She was frantic. She was pacing the floor, screaming on the phone with some cheap online legal service about filing a patent. She didn't realize I was still in the room. She held the hard drive out to me. I didn't wipe it, Ingrid said. I cloned it. I stared at the small silver rectangle in her hand. It felt like looking at a loaded weapon. What's on it? I asked. Everything, Ingrid said. Her private emails, the chat logs she thought she deleted, and the exact folder she downloaded from your server at 2:00 a.m. to attach to that patent filing. I took the drive. It was cold against my palm. Ingrid, if she finds out you have this, she will sue you into the ground. Let her try, Ingrid said, her voice finally steadying. I've been picking up her dry cleaning and lying to her vendors for 2 years. I know she uses company funds to pay for her personal Pilates instructor. She's broke, Lena. She's completely leveraged. If this deal doesn't go through, she's bankrupt. I looked at the drive, then back at the heavy metal door leading to the office. Renata was in there, drinking coffee, convinced she had me boxed in. Do you have your personal laptop with you? I asked Ingrid. She nodded, patting her tote bag. Go down to the lobby, I told her. Sit in the cafe. Don't talk to anyone. I'll text you when it's over. Ingrid turned to head down the stairs, but paused. Lena? Yeah, burn her down, Ingrid said. She disappeared down the concrete steps. I walked back into the office. The glass door to the boardroom was still shut. Marcus and Sullivan were deep in conversation, their faces tight. Edmund was looking out the window at the skyline. Renata was sitting at my desk. She had her feet up on the edge of my wastebasket, casually scrolling through her phone, holding her coffee mug. Everything okay? She asked, not looking up. You look pale. I'm fine, I said. I walked past her, heading straight for the boardroom. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. Sullivan looked up, annoyed by the interruption. We aren't finished, Marcus said tersely. I am, I said. I walked over to the table and set the silver hard drive down on the glass directly in front of Sullivan Thorne. What is this? Sullivan asked. That is a complete clone of Renata's secondary hard drive, I said. Sourced this morning by her former executive assistant. Through the glass wall, I saw Renata stand up from my desk. She dropped her phone. She didn't bother to pick it up. She started walking fast toward the boardroom. On that drive, I continued, keeping my eyes on Sullivan. You will find the exact file directory she downloaded to attach to her fraudulent provisional patent. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. And, I said, Renata doesn't code. She doesn't understand version control. Renata hit the door handle, pushing her way into the room. Don't listen to her, she shouted. That's stolen property. Sit down, Miss Drent, Edmund said. It wasn't a request. Renata froze, but she didn't sit. She glared at me, her chest heaving. As I was saying, I told Sullivan, she doesn't understand version control. When she panic downloaded the repository at 2:00 a.m., she didn't pull the master branch. She pulled a deprecated testing branch. Marcus leaned forward, suddenly very interested. What does that mean, Lena? It means, I said, that the code she submitted to the United States Patent Office under penalty of perjury is literally just 2,000 lines of a recursive loop that prints the lyrics to Never Gonna Give You Up over and over again. The room went dead silent. Sullivan Thorne stared at me. For a second, I thought he was going to reprimand me. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. He looked down at his legal pad, then back up at Renata. Miss Drent, Sullivan said smoothly. Did you submit a rickroll to the federal government? Renata's face went completely slack. She looked at me, horror dawning in her eyes as she realized what she had actually uploaded. Marcus let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. The tension in his shoulders vanished entirely. He looked at Sullivan. Does that invalidate the provisional claim? Instantly, Sullivan said. It's frivolous. It carries zero legal weight. The IP is entirely unencumbered. Renata's hands gripped the back of the leather chair in front of her. Her knuckles were white. The bravado was gone, replaced by a frantic, scrambling energy. She looked at Marcus, then at Edmund, realizing her primary weapon was useless. But she didn't surrender. She took a deep, jagged breath and let go of the chair. Fine, Renata said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. The patent is garbage, but I still own the LLC. I am still the sole managing member on the bank accounts. And as of an hour ago, I hold the only administrative passwords to the Oz servers hosting the actual functional software. Marcus frowned. We can legally compel you to surrender them. Sure you can, Renata said. Take me to court. Serve me with a subpoena. I'll drag it out for 6 months. In the meantime, the servers go dark because I won't pay the hosting bills. The company dies before it even launches. She looked directly at me. I want $1 million. Today, wired to my personal account. A clean buyout. Or I burn the servers to the ground and take the whole company with me. Marcus stared at her, his hands flat on the glass table. You are out of your mind. I'm cashing out, Renata said. She leaned against the doorframe, sipping her coffee as if we were discussing office supplies instead of extortion. 1 million. Wired right now. You get the company, you get the servers, and I walk away. If I don't see the confirmation in my Chase account by 8 o'clock, I log in from my phone and I delete the entire Oz infrastructure. Every database, every repository. I'll scrub the backups too. Marcus looked at Sullivan. Can she do that? Mechanically? Yes, Sullivan said, his face a mask of professional irritation. Legally, it's corporate sabotage. We could pursue criminal charges. Go ahead, Renata smiled. I'll do 2 years at a white-collar camp, and you'll lose a $50 million valuation. Your limited partners will crucify you, Marcus. You'll never raise another fund in this city. She wasn't wrong. That was the sickening part. She had found the exact pressure point where the cost of justice was higher than the cost of submission. I looked at Edmund. He was still staring out the the window at the morning traffic far below. The sky had turned a pale, bruised purple. Pay her, Edmund said to the glass. Marcus whipped his head around. Edmund, absolutely not. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we certainly don't pay them $1 million out of the seed capital. Edmund slowly turned back to face the room. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly bored. It's $1 million, Marcus. It's a rounding error. I spend more than that on fuel for the jet in a fiscal year. Pay the woman, get her out of the building, and let Lena get to work. It sets a precedent, Marcus argued, his voice rising. It solves a problem, Edmund corrected. He looked at Sullivan. Draft a full release of claims. She signs away her equity, her board seat, the LLC, the fake patent, and every piece of intellectual property rights she thinks she has. Ironclad. No non-disparagement clause, though. I want to be entirely free to tell people exactly what she is. Sullivan nodded and began typing rapidly on his laptop. I sat there, my stomach turning over. I had wanted Renata to face consequences. I had wanted her to lose. Instead, she was about to walk out of this building a millionaire. She had lied, cheated, humiliated me, and tried to steal my life's work, and her punishment was a 7-figure payday. It tasted like ash in my mouth. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. Edmund looked at me. I am buying a clean slate, Lena. In business, you sometimes have to pay the garbage man to haul away the trash. Renata's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. Call it what you want, Edmund. Just make sure the routing number is correct. The next 20 minutes were excruciating. Sullivan drafted the release. Renata read every line, her eyes scanning the legal jargon with paranoid intensity. Marcus sat on the phone with his bank's wire department, verbally authorizing an immediate transfer of funds. The silence in the boardroom was heavy and suffocating. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the hack system and the sharp clatter of Sullivan's keyboard. I kept looking at my phone, checking the time. 7:42 a.m. Finally, Marcus hung up. The wire is initiated. It should clear instantly. Renata picked up her phone. We all watched her. Her thumb swiped down the screen, refreshing her banking app. Once, twice. On the third swipe, her posture relaxed. A genuine, radiant smile broke across her face. Received, she said. She walked over to my desk, grabbed a yellow sticky note, and scribbled something down. She walked back into the boardroom and slapped the note onto the glass in front of me. The master password for the Oz-root account, she said. The two-factor authentication has been routed back to your phone number. You're the admin again. CEO, she picked up Sullivan's pen, signed the heavy stack of release documents with a flourish, and tossed the pen onto the table. It's been a pleasure doing business with you gentlemen, she said, picking up her designer bag. She looked at me. Good luck, Lena. Try not to run this one into bankruptcy. She turned and walked toward the exit. I watched her go, a sick feeling of defeat settling into my bones. We had the company, but she had won. She reached the glass doors leading to the elevator lobby. She pushed them open, then stopped. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her silhouette framed by the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. Slowly, she turned back around. Oh, there is one minor detail, Renata called out across the open office. Her voice echoed slightly against the concrete floors. Before I signed that release, I was still the managing member of the LLC, fully authorized to conduct business on behalf of the company. Marcus stiffened. What did you do? Renata reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and let it flutter to the floor by the receptionist's desk. I didn't just spend yesterday afternoon drafting a fake patent, she said. I also had a very productive lunch meeting with Caspian Wyndham. The name hit the room like a physical blow. Wyndham Solutions was the largest data aggregation firm on the East Coast. They were the apex predator in our sector. They were exactly who we were building this algorithm to compete against. I signed a non-exclusive, perpetual commercial license with them, Renata said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I gave them a complete copy of the source code. The real code, Lena not the Rickroll joke, I uploaded to the patent office. I pulled the master branch yesterday at noon. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went numb. You sold our product to our direct competitor, Marcus whispered, his face completely pale. For $500,000, Renata confirmed. The funds cleared my account last night. So between Caspian and you, Marcus, I'm walking away with $1.5 million. And Wyndham has a 12-hour head start on your tech. With their engineering team, they'll have it integrated into their enterprise suite by Friday. She smiled, a cold, empty expression. You bought a clean slate, Edmund. Too bad you didn't buy the market share. She let the glass door swing shut behind her. The click of the latch sounded incredibly loud. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was absolute. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I walked over to the reception desk and picked up the folded paper she had dropped. It was a photocopy of a standard licensing agreement. My eyes scanned the signatures at the bottom. Renata's sharp, aggressive loop, and next to it, the heavy, blocky signature of Caspian Wyndham. It was real. It was legal. Wyndham Solutions had thousands of servers, a massive sales force, and an unlimited marketing budget. If they launched my algorithm under their branding, we were dead in the water. We wouldn't just be competing against a giant. We'd be competing against a giant using my own weapons. I walked back into the boardroom and placed the contract on the table. Sullivan picked it up, read it, and let out a slow, tired breath. It's binding. She had signatory authority when she executed this. Marcus put his head in his hands. We're finished. The seed round is worthless. The product is out in the wild. He looked up at Edmund, his eyes panicked. We have to claw the money back. We have to freeze the wire. You can't, Sullivan said quietly. She signed the release after the wire cleared, and the release absolves her of any prior actions taken as managing member. She legally immunized herself right in front of us. Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. $3 million committed for a compromised asset. I looked at Edmund. He hadn't moved from his spot at the table. He was staring at the sticky note with the password on it. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defeated. He just looked at me. Well, Lena, Edmund said, his voice completely steady. It appears your algorithm is about to be deployed by a multi-billion-dollar corporation without your supervision. Tell me something. I swallowed hard. What? When you built the architecture, Edmund said, leaning forward slightly, did you leave the back door open, or did you lock it? I looked at him. My chest was tight, the adrenaline of the morning crashing and leaving a cold, sick hollow behind my ribs. There is no back door, I said. It's not a movie, Edmund. You don't just leave a magic portal in enterprise-grade architecture. If you do, it fails basic security audits before it ever gets deployed. Edmund didn't blink. So Wyndham Solutions has a pristine, fully operational core algorithm. Yes, I said. But I stopped. I thought about the code. I thought about what Renata actually knew about development cycles versus what she confidently pretended to know in boardrooms. But what? Marcus asked. He looked desperate, leaning across the glass table. But she pulled the master branch, I said slowly, the realization piecing itself together in my mind. The master branch is the clean code. It's the engine. It's what compiles and runs. I looked down at the table. But it doesn't contain the API keys. It doesn't contain the specific data ingestion models we built for our beta test. It's an engine without a steering wheel or fuel lines. To integrate it into their enterprise suite by Friday, they would need the deployment environment, Sullivan finished, his eyes narrowing slightly, which she didn't sell them, because she didn't have access to the Oz architecture when she met with Wyndham yesterday. I nodded. They have a Ferrari block, but they have to machine every other part themselves before they can turn the key. It'll take them months to safely integrate it into a legacy system as massive as Wyndham's. Marcus exhaled a long, shaky breath, dropping his head into his hands. Months. Okay, that's a window. It's a small window, but it's a window. It's not enough, I said. My voice sounded flat in the empty boardroom. They have unlimited resources. They can put 50 senior engineers on it today. We have me and an empty office. Edmund tapped his index finger against the glass table. Once, twice. The sound was sharp and deliberate. No, Edmund said. You have me. He stood up. He slowly buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. Sullivan, draft a breach of contract suit against Wyndham Solutions. They executed a commercial license with an individual who knowingly misrepresented her authorization to distribute proprietary assets, regardless of her signatory status. Tie it up in injunctions. I want their legal department bleeding billable hours by tomorrow morning. Sullivan wrote something down on his legal pad. It's flimsy, Edmund. The release she signed today covers her, and Wyndham will argue they bought it in good faith. I don't care if it's flimsy, Edmund said, his tone dropping back to that terrifying flat register. I don't need to win the lawsuit. I need to freeze their development cycle. If their general counsel thinks there is even a 10% chance a federal judge issues an injunction on their new enterprise suite, they will quarantine that code until the suit is resolved. They won't risk tainting their flagship product with contested IP. Marcus looked up, wiping a hand across his face. You're going to sue Wyndham? Edmund, that's a bottomless pit of legal fees. They have an army of lawyers. I have a very deep pit, Edmund said dryly. He looked at me. Lena, you have the root passwords. You have the servers. How long does it take you to deploy the beta if you have no friction? 6 weeks, I said immediately. If I have a dedicated team. I need 3 full-stack developers and a database architect who understands the specific load requirements. Get them, Edmund said. Hire whoever you need. Double their market rate. Marcus will authorize the payroll draw this afternoon. Marcus looked like he was going to argue about the budget, but one glance from Edmund shut him down entirely. Edmund walked toward the door. Wyndham is a dinosaur. Lena, they move slowly. They have meetings about meetings to discuss their meetings. You have no red tape. Build it. Launch it. We will bury them in the market before they ever get out of the discovery phase of the lawsuit. He left. Sullivan packed up his briefcase and followed him out, his luxury shoes silent on the carpet. Marcus lingered for a moment. He looked at the empty coffee cup Renata had left behind on my desk, then looked back at me. He looked 10 years older than he had at the restaurant last night. I'll get the HR paperwork and the payroll authorization started, Marcus said quietly. I'm sorry, Lena, about all of it. I should have seen through her. Just get me the authorization, I said. He nodded and walked out. I was alone in the office. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the building's ventilation. I walked out of the boardroom and sat down at my desk. I looked at the yellow sticky note with the root password scrawled in Renata's handwriting. I opened my laptop. I logged into the Oz portal. The 2-factor authentication pinged my phone. I entered the code. The dashboard loaded. Everything was there. The servers were humming quietly in a data center somewhere in Virginia, completely untouched. I picked up my phone and texted Ingrid. It's done. Come back up. 10 minutes later, the elevator dinged. Ingrid walked out, still clutching her heavy tote bag. She looked around the empty office, her eyes darting toward the glass boardroom. Where is she? Ingrid asked. Her voice hushed. Gone, I said. She got a buyout. She sold a copy of the code to Wyndham. Ingrid's jaw dropped. She stopped dead in the middle of the floor. What? She won, I said, the exhaustion finally seeping into my voice, weighing my shoulders down. She walked away with $1.5 million and absolutely zero legal liability. It's done. Ingrid walked over to the desk. She looked at the sticky note. She looked at the empty chairs in the boardroom. So what happens now? She asked. Now, I said, leaning back in my chair, I have to hire a senior development team by tomorrow morning and build a company from scratch in 6 weeks to beat a multi-billion-dollar corporation to market. I looked at her. Do you want your job back? I need an operations manager, someone who actually knows how to run the logistics of this place. Ingrid let out a short, shaky laugh. She dropped her tote bag onto an empty desk. Operations manager. Yeah, okay, I'll need a raise. You'll get one, I said. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. I ordered lunch that neither of us ate. I called developers I used to work with. I called people who had lost their jobs when Daedalus went under. Most of them didn't answer. The ones who did were hesitant. They remembered the bankruptcy. They remembered the brutal industry press that had painted me as an incompetent founder who couldn't manage a tech stack. I didn't blame them for saying no. By 6 p.m., I had 2 tentative yeses. I needed 4 to even stand a chance. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the unfinished office floor. I was staring at a spreadsheet of potential recruits when my phone rang. It was an unsaved, out-of-state number. I answered it on speaker, typing an email with my free hand. This is Lena. Lena. It was a man's voice. Familiar, rough around the edges with a slight hesitation before he spoke. My stomach dropped perfectly into my shoes. I stopped typing. Soren. Soren had been the lead engineer at Daedalus. boss, the one who falsified the stress test data to meet Renata's arbitrary deadlines back then. The reason the company collapsed. The reason I had drained my 401k to pay severance. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. I heard you're hiring, Soren said. The line crackled slightly. He sounded incredibly tired. I heard you're spinning up something new, something massive, a direct competitor to Wyndham. Where did you hear that? I asked, my voice tight. It had been less than 12 hours since the buyout. Word travels fast in the city, Soren said, especially when Renata Drent is suddenly shopping for a $2 million condo in Tribeca and telling her broker she just closed the biggest tech deal of the quarter. I squeezed my eyes shut, rubbing my temples. Of course she was. I'm not hiring you, Soren, I said, reaching for the button to end the call. Don't ever call this number again. Wait, he said quickly, his voice spiking with panic. Lena, just listen to me. 30 seconds. Please. I didn't hang up. I know what I did, Soren said. I know I ruined Daedalus. I know I ruined you. I haven't worked in the industry since. Nobody will touch me. I've been doing freelance support for a dental network in New Jersey. They shouldn't touch you, I said flatly. You lied about safety data. You falsified structural thermal reports. You could have burned people's houses down, Soren. I was terrified, he said, his voice cracking. Renata told me if I didn't pass the audit, the funding would get pulled and everyone would lose their jobs. I panicked. It was the worst mistake of my life. He took a shaky breath. But I know your architecture, Lena. I know how you code. I know how you build data pathways. I don't care, I said. Did you fix the latency issue in the appy handshake? He asked. I froze. I stared at the blank wall of my new office. Because Wyndham won't be able to, Soren continued, speaking rapidly now. I saw the press release about Wyndham's new enterprise integration strategy last month. If they plug your core algorithm into their legacy database, the appy handshake is going to bottleneck at the ingestion point. It won't just lag, Lena. It'll crash their servers within 48 hours of a hard launch. My hands went completely numb. He was right. The master branch I had built was perfectly optimized for a modern, lightweight microservices architecture. Wyndham's entire enterprise suite was notoriously built on a monolithic, 20-year-old legacy system. If they tried to force-feed their massive volume of commercial data through my algorithm without entirely rebuilding their appy layer, which they wouldn't do if they were rushing a launch, it wouldn't just bottleneck. It would cause a cascading failure across their entire network. Renata hadn't just sold them a stolen product. She had sold them a grenade. And neither she nor Caspian Wyndham had any idea the pin was already pulled. Are you absolutely sure about their legacy stack? I asked. My voice was very quiet. I read their engineering blog every week, Lena. They've been putting off their core database migration for 3 years because it's too expensive, Soren said. They're running a patched-together monolithic structure. If they plug your ingestion engine into that, your code is going to request 50,000 concurrent connections a second. Their ports will jam, the database will lock up to protect itself, and then the failure will cascade through every client-facing portal they have. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. Okay, I said. Thank you, Soren. Does this mean? He started, his voice thick with a desperate kind of hope. It means you gave me a heads up, I said. It doesn't fix Daedalus. It doesn't give those junior devs their savings back. But I appreciate the call. I hung up before he could say anything else. I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't need to carry his guilt for him, either. I sat in the darkening office for a long time. The streetlights from the avenue below cast long, pale grids across the fresh carpet. I looked at the whiteboard where I had desperately started mapping out a 6-week sprint schedule to build a company from nothing. I picked up the whiteboard eraser and wiped the whole thing clean. Then I picked up my phone and called Edmund. He answered on the second ring. Tell me you have a team. Call off the payroll draw, I said. Tell Marcus to cancel the recruiter retainers. We don't need a team by tomorrow. There was a brief silence on the line. Did you lose the root access? No, I said. I have the access. But I just found out what Renata actually sold to Caspian Wyndham. She sold them a massive high-performance engine, and they are about to bolt it into a 20-year-old chassis. We don't need to beat them to market, Edmund. We just need to let them launch. I explained the appy handshake. I explained the concurrent connections. I explained that because Renata didn't know how the architecture actually functioned. She hadn't given them the specific deployment environment warnings that were heavily documented in a separate, encrypted repository she never bothered to read. When I finished, Edmund didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded entirely different. The cold, aristocratic edge was gone. He sounded like an engineer who had just found the perfect tolerance. Don't write a single line of code, Edmund said. Go home, get some sleep. Let's see what Friday brings. Thursday was the longest day of my life. Ingrid and I sat in the empty office. She ordered Thai food. We drank terrible coffee. We watched the industry news tickers. Marcus came by at noon, pacing the floor, chewing on his thumbnail, terrified that Soren was wrong and that Wyndham was going to successfully deploy my life's work. Friday morning, at 9 a.m., Wyndham Solutions issued a massive, coordinated press release. They announced the Wyndham Apex Data Suite. They boasted about a revolutionary proprietary algorithmic architecture that would process client data at unprecedented speeds. They had full-page spreads in the trade papers. They had a slick video on their homepage. At 9:30 a.m., Renata posted on her professional network. It was a picture of her holding a cappuccino on a balcony in Tribeca. The caption read, "Thrilled to announce my successful exit from my latest venture. So incredibly proud to see my foundational architecture being utilized by industry leaders like Wyndham Solutions. Onward and upward." I closed the tab. I felt sick to my stomach. What if Soren was wrong? What if Wyndham's engineers had caught the latency issue in testing? What if they had written a patch? At 1:15 p.m., Ingrid walked over to my desk. She didn't say a word. She just turned her laptop screen toward me. It was a live outage map of the East Coast. Wyndham Solutions' primary client portals were flashing yellow. "It's starting," she whispered. By 2 p.m., the yellow dots turned red. The tech blogs started picking it up. A minor service disruption for Wyndham's enterprise clients. By 3 p.m., it was a 4-alarm fire. Wyndham's entire network was in a death spiral. Corporate clients, hospitals, hospitals, logistics firms, regional banks were completely locked out of their databases. The API bottleneck had triggered a hard crash in Wyndham's central servers. Every time their engineers tried to reboot the system, the algorithm immediately requested 50,000 connections and crashed it again. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus burst through the glass doors of our office. He didn't even look like a venture capitalist. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and he was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "They're bricked," Marcus gasped, leaning against the reception desk. "I just got off the phone with a buddy at a hedge fund. Wyndham's stock just dropped 9% in 2 hours. They had to take their entire core network offline just to stop the bleeding. They have no idea how to fix it because their engineers didn't write the code." Edmund walked in right behind him. He looked exactly the same as he always did, immaculate and calm, but his pale blue eyes were bright. "Sullivan just filed the injunction," Edmund said smoothly. "Wyndham is currently paralyzed, bleeding millions of dollars an hour, and they just got served with a federal lawsuit claiming their new flagship product is built on stolen IP. What are they going to do?" I asked, standing up. "What any massive, bureaucratic corporation does when they face a catastrophic liability," Edmund said. "They are going to look for a scapegoat." He walked over to the glass window and looked out at the city. "Caspian Wyndham is not going to take the blame for breaking his own company. He bought that software in good faith from a woman who signed a legal document claiming it was a finished, commercially viable product. It wasn't. It was a digital landmine." Edmund turned back to me. "Wyndham's general counsel is going to sue Renata Drent for fraud, breach of warranty, and corporate sabotage. They are going to freeze her bank accounts by Monday morning. That $1.5 million she extorted from us, it's going to be completely consumed by legal retainers. She will spend the next 10 years in deposition rooms trying to explain how a codebase she claimed she wrote managed to destroy the largest data network on the East Coast." The room was quiet. I looked at the sticky note on my desk, the one with Renata's handwriting on it. She had wanted to play the visionary CEO. She had wanted the power, the money, and the credit. But she had never wanted to do the actual work. And because she didn't know the work, she hadn't known she was selling Caspian Wyndham a defective bomb. "And us?" I asked. Marcus grinned. "Wyndham is going to be locked in litigation and server recovery for a year. The market is completely wide open, and we have the only clean, functional version of the architecture, with the proper deployment protocols." He clapped his hands together. "So, Monday morning, we hire a team, a real one this time, and we build it right." Edmund nodded once, an approving final gesture. "I will leave you to it." "Good work, Lena." They left. The office was quiet again. Ingrid walked back over to her desk. She sat down, opened a fresh notebook, and uncapped a pen. "I'll get the job listings drafted tonight," she said. "We can start interviews on Tuesday. Make sure the salaries are 10% above market rate," I said. "No more cutting corners." "Got it." She smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Have a good weekend, boss." I sat at my desk. I opened the Oz dashboard. The servers were humming quietly, perfectly stable, waiting for instructions. I didn't feel a sudden rush of euphoria. I didn't feel the need to pop champagne or post a picture of a coffee cup on the internet. Surviving doesn't feel like a parade. It just feels like taking a very deep breath after being underwater for a long time. I looked at the blank code editor on my screen. I put my hands on the keyboard. Then, for the first time in 3 years, I went to work without looking over my shoulder.